Let me ask you first of all about the red herring at the White House today. Janet Yellen, who was there interviewed by the president yesterday, made a return visit, as our Jennifer Jacobs reported today. Ended up being she was there as part of a formal part of the job, going back to meet with Gary Cohn and other members of the White House staff. But what have we heard from the White House about how this process is unfolding and when we might get a nominee named?
I feel like I'm back on the campaign trail. We were on Capitol Hill. Then we get this report that Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen's back at the White House. Yes, exactly. So we're rushing there. And then, of course, I spoke with a source familiar who says this is a routine meeting that the Fed chair meets frequently with Gary Cohn. But, of course, you know, when two of the 5 names on the short list are together in a room, of course, a lot of folks watching it. That chart that you put up on the terminal, #BTV, 3203 is really fascinating to watch how all of the latest twists and turns have developed. It'll be interesting to see whether investors are looking at this meeting between Mr. Cohn and Fed Chair Yellen as perhaps evidence as such. But I can tell you I've spoken with several sources, including on the Senate Banking Committee. They are going to have to move the nomination to the Senate floor of whomever President Trump picks. And they say that Fed Chair Yellen is actually number 5 on their list of who they would like to see be nominated to the Federal Reserve. Now, that said, should the president pick Jerome Powell, who we've been reporting all week long has emerged as a potential frontrunner, there are some Republicans who have actually voted against his nomination. But again, I spoke with a source on the Senate Banking Committee who tells me that no matter who the president picks, it is very likely, if it's one of those 5 names that we've been reporting, it is very likely that it will advance out of the Senate Banking Committee and very likely be confirmed by the Senate. That's a very sharp contrast than the last go around when progressives were divided over Larry Summers and the eventual Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen.
There were some reports that we could even see a 2-for package, that it could be a package deal where we could see a combination of, say, John Taylor and Powell together. Could that be a possibility?
Well, there are still vacancies on the Federal Reserve Board that the president has to name, and so there is no timeline for some of these other vacant seats. I can tell you that there are a lot of conservatives who are pushing for John Taylor. This is someone who has received praise from people like House Financial Services Committee Chairman Jeb Hensarling. We should note that Mark Calabria is Vice President Mike Pence's top economist. He is someone who has also in the past spoken highly and favorably of John Taylor. And, you know, I think that when you look at the lists of folks, and with Mr. Taylor in particular, he's walked back on whether or not he would implement the so-called Taylor rule in a public speech. And that really was interpreted by many people as a move to the middle, so to speak, to kind of ease concerns of folks who have thought that the rules-based Taylor rule is a bit too controversial for them. So he's had some interesting public comments. I think Fed Chair Yellen's comments on the Volcker rule also, not to get too wonky, but have also been really interesting to watch how she's evolved on that position as well.
How's this process played out in the past, Kevin? I mentioned you covered it before. I recall how President Obama was on vacation in Oak Bluffs, Massachusetts on Martha's Vineyard when he brought Ben Bernanke up to re-nominate him. How far in advance of the end of a tenure does this usually happen?
Well, I think that you got to get something done by the first couple of months of next year. The president, what we're hearing, would ideally like to name someone before he wheels up on Air Force One for his Asia trip. And I think that, regardless of who the president selects, if you look at those 5 names, we have seen, at least from the market reaction as well as here in Washington, that they would be favorably met, and even the folks who are critical of some of the choices really wouldn't launch a campaign against them.